The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and a warm welcome to all. I am Ridil on behalf of Care Ratings. Welcome you to our today's webinar on cost of borrowing for corporates from the Indian debt markets. Appreciate your time. Our speakers for today is Kavita, Chacko, Senior Economist at Care Ratings. Along with her, we have Manisha, Sachedva, Associate Economist at Care Ratings. The discussion as always is in form of a presentation which is visible on your screen. In case of queries, please key in the questions. We'll be having a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. I repeat, in case of queries, please key in the questions. We'll be having a Q&A session no sooner the presentation ends. May I request Kavita to begin the session?
Thank you, Mridul. A very good afternoon to all, and thank you for joining us today. In this webinar, we examine the prevailing scenario of borrowings by corporates in the country. The cost of borrowings for corporates from the debt markets, namely corporate bonds and commercial papers, witnessed a significant increase for the major part of 2018-19 in the aftermath of the liquidity stress in the NBFC segment. While there has been an overall decline in yields and consequently the cost of borrowings for corporates in recent months from the peak rates of the second half of 2018, the decline has not been uniform across categories and sectors. In order to ascertain the extent of decline in the cost of funds for corporates, we shall have a closer look at the trend in borrowings by corporates from the debt markets. Additionally, the movement in yields of government securities as well as the secondary market yields of corporate bonds, both of which have a bearing on the cost of funds of corporates, is examined. Further, the average interest rates for fresh borrowings via corporate bonds and commercial papers for key sectors as well as comparisons with bank lending rates is also covered here. In terms of borrowings, corporates are seen to be increasingly diversifying their sources of funds. Although banks continue to be the dominant source of funds for corporates, there has been a decline in the share of bank credit in the overall funds raised by corporates in recent years, while the borrowings from the debt capital markets and foreign currency loans have been gaining traction. The data on private sector liabilities from the CMI database shows that the proportion of bank credit as a percentage of overall corporate borrowings has seen a sustained decline from 50% in 2016-17 to 44% in 2018-19. At the same time, borrowings via corporate bonds has witnessed a doubling of share in the last 3 years from 10% in 2016-17 to 21% in the fiscal year gone by. Similarly, commercial papers too have come to account for 9% of corporate borrowings in 2018-19, a significant increase from around 3% in the preceding 2 years. Corporates have also been tapping the external markets for their funding needs, and foreign currency loans or external commercial borrowings accounted for 12% of total borrowings in the last fiscal year. Coming to the borrowings from banks, businesses covering industry and services sector together account for 60% of the total outstanding non-food bank credit. The overall bank lending grew by over 12% in 2018-19. Credit dispersal to industry grew by 7% and that to services by 18%. As per the latest data, as of end May 2019, the year-on-year growth in non-food bank credit is 11%. While bank credit dispersal to industry has seen an improvement in the current fiscal, having grown by 6.4% versus the 1.4% growth year ago, that of services sector has been lower at 14.8% versus 21.9% last year. Within industry, the credit growth is driven by the large corporates who account for a share of 83%. Bank credit offtake to this segment in May 2019 grew by 7.4% versus the 3.2% growth of year ago. In case of the services segment, bank credit offtake to NBFCs account for the largest share, 27%, followed by trade at 22%. Credit offtake to the NBFC sector has improved, having grown by 40.5% in May 2019, a 10.5% increase from a year ago. At the same time, credit dispersal to the trade segment witnessed a moderation with growth of 7.3% over the growth of 15.5% of a year ago. It can thus be inferred that the LME segment and NBFCs have been increasingly availing bank credit to meet their funding requirements in the current fiscal year. Foreign currency borrowings have seen an increase in the last 2 years. External commercial registrations saw a year-on-year growth of 31% and 45% in the last 2 fiscal years, respectively. In the first 2 months of the current fiscal, that is April and May 2019, there has been a 27% increase in ECB registrations over a year ago. Borrowers have been increasingly tapping foreign currency borrowings owing to constrained lending in the domestic market on account of liquidity issues and lower cost of these overseas borrowings. The weighted average interest margins over 6 months LIBOR in 2018-19 was lower at 1.2% compared with 1.34% in the previous year. In terms of sectoral borrowings, the highest share in total ECB registrations in 2018-19 was from the financial services, followed by petroleum sector. Together, they accounted for around 47% of total registrations. The borrowings by the financial services segment was towards on-lending. Corporate bond issuances in 2018-19 saw a marginal improvement of 1.5% over a year ago. The liquidity pressures in the NBFC segment impacted fundraising from these markets during the year. Issuances in the first 4 months of the ongoing fiscal year at Rs 1.5 lakh crores is 17% higher than that in the corresponding period of a year ago. In terms of sectoral issuances, fundraising is driven by the banking, financial services, and housing finance segment, which together accounted for 63% of issuances in the current fiscal. There has, however, been a moderation in the share of issuances of financial services and housing finance companies in the current fiscal by 5% from that of last year. Power and road sector, on the other hand, has seen an increase in share of issuances in the current financial year. Commercial paper issuances in 2018-19 at Rs 14.7 lakh crores was 17% higher than a year ago. It need be noted that all these issuances were not fresh fund infusion and included sizable reissuances. Issuances in the first 4 months of the ongoing fiscal year at Rs 3.4 lakh crores is 20% lower than that of a year ago. Here too, issuances are dominated by banks, financial services, and housing finance companies. The cost of borrowing by the government is a key determinant of overall cost of funds in the economy. Yields of government securities have witnessed a sustained decline since February 2019, which can be attributed to the series of policy rate cuts by the RBI. The RBI has cut interest rates by 75 basis points in the last 6 months. The weighted average yield of GSEC issuances, based on the calculation by CARE Ratings, has declined by 86 basis points since February 2019, and the benchmark 10-year GSEC yield in the secondary market has declined by 83 basis points during this period. There was a notable decline in GSEC yields in both the primary and secondary markets since June 2019 by 65 basis points in case of primary issuances and 76 basis points in case of 10-year benchmark GSEC yield, following the improvement in banking system liquidity, which moved into a surplus after being in deficit for nearly 8 months. Further, the central government sticking to its fiscal consolidation roadmap in the final budget for 2019-20 and with inflation ruling within the RBI target range aided the fall in yields in both the primary and secondary markets. The moderation in GSEC yields was also followed by the decline in the secondary market yields of corporate bonds. There has been a near sustained decline in the secondary market yields of corporate bonds in recent months. The weighted average yield across across rating categories of corporate bonds based on the calculation by Care Ratings have fallen by 38 basis points during the 4-month period of February to June 2019 and has moderated by 100 basis points from the highs touched in September 2018, that is of 9.32%. Yields in the secondary market of corporate bonds are a key determinant of the cost of borrowing in the primary market. I now request Manisha to take this webinar forward and to throw light on the movement in cost of funds in the primary markets.
The weighted average yield of corporate bond issuances across rating categories in July 2019 stood at a 23-month low of 7.9%. The yields during the month were 194 bips lower than the peak yields of 9.9% in September 2018. There has been a sustained decline in yields since the start of this fiscal year. In the 4-month period from April to July 2019, the weighted average yields have declined by 73 bips. On a month-on-month basis, the yields declined by 35 bips in July 2019. It need be noted that this yield decline is largely for corporate bond issuances which carry a high investment grade ratings, that is AA- and above. Over 90% of the issuances during April to July 2019 carried a rating of AA- and above. The analysis of the yield movement and thereby cost of issuances for key sectors shows that the decline in yield varies significantly across the sectors. The yield movement for four key segments, that is all India financial institutions, housing finance companies, non-banking financial companies and non-NBFCs in the AAA rating category, has been illustrated in this slide here. Among these four segments, the largest moderation in yields of fresh issuances since October 2018 has been in the case of AIFs at 148 bips, followed by HFCs, which declined by 128 bips. Yield of NBFCs have declined by 76 bips, while that of non-NBFCs declined by 68 bips during this period. The weighted average yield of issuances of AIFs in July 2019 was the lowest at 7.38%. Compared with AIFs, the yields of HFCs was 54 bips higher at 7.92%, and for NBFCs, it was 63 bips higher at 8.45%. It is also to be noted that the cost of borrowings for NBFCs has been comparatively higher than that of AIFs and HFCs since December 2018. There has been a decline in the yields of commercial paper issuances too. The weighted average yields of commercial paper issuances in July 2019 at 6.6% declined by 158 bips from the highs of July 2018. On a month-on-month basis, the yields declined by 22 bips in July 2019. A closer examination of cost of borrowings across key sectors for all the rating categories shows that the decline in yields varies significantly across the sectors, namely NBFCs, AIFs, HFCs, and non-NBFCs. Among these four segments, the largest moderation in yields of fresh issuances since October 2018 has been in the case of NBFCs at 145 bips, followed by AIFs, which has declined by 127 bips. Yields of HFCs have declined by 111 bips, while that of non-NBFCs declined by 90 bips during this period. The weighted average yield of issuances of AIFs in July 19 was the lowest at 6.04%. Compared with AIFs, the yields of HFCs was 93 bips higher at 6.83%, and for NBFCs, it was 93 bips higher at 6.97%. In the case of commercial paper, the cost of borrowings for NBFCs has been comparatively higher than that of AIFs, HFCs, and non-NBFCs since April 2018. The comparison of the marginal cost of funding-based lending rate or MCLR of scheduled commercial banks with the movement in weighted average yields of corporate bonds shows that the corporate bond yields in the secondary and primary market since March has largely been lower than the lending rate of banks, reflective of the faster transmission of the RBI cuts in the bond markets. The RBI has reduced policy rates by 75 bips during the period February to July 2019. While the rate cut transmission in bank lending rates, as per the movement in the median MCLR, shows that 75 bips rate cut led to a 10 bips cut in the median MCLR during Feb to June 2019, the decline in primary corporate bond and commercial paper yields during the same period was 63 bips and 35 bips respectively. To conclude, overall weighted corporate bond yields in the primary market in the month of July 2019 was 194 bips lower from the peak of September 2018. The weighted average yield of commercial paper market in July 2019 was 158 bips lower from the peak of July 2018. The decline in yields of corporate bond and commercial paper issuances has not been uniform across segments. In case of corporate bond issuances, yields of AIFs has witnessed the largest decline of 148 bips during October 18 to July 2019. In case of commercial paper issuances, yields of NBFCs has witnessed the largest decline of 145 bips during the same time period. Non-NBFCs witnessed the lowest decline in weighted average yields in both bond and commercial paper market. Thank you.
Thank you, Manisha, Kavita. Now we'll be taking a break of 2 minutes before we begin the Q&A session. In case of queries, you're please requested to key in the questions in the slot provided. I repeat, we'll be having a break of 2 minutes before we begin our Q&A session. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome back. We will take the questions now. We have received a question. Uh, Here we have somebody who has asked us for the definition of AIFs, which corporates are included in this. Here, only the public sector corporations such as NABARD, Power Finance Corporation, and the like are a part of the AIFs. There's a question on what is the trend of ECB borrowings for NBFCs in the last 6 months after RBI relaxed the reforms on average maturity. Any idea about the average cost of ECBs for NBFCs? Mm, I do not have specifically the cost for average cost of ECBs for NBFCs, but overall there has been a reduction in the cost of the LIBOR plus 6 months LIBOR plus the margins, which has come down from 1.34% to one in 2017-18 to 1.2% in 18-19, which is indicative of the lower cost of raising funds via this route. However, there is this exchange rate risk which needs to be kept in mind while tapping this source of funds. I've received a question. The weighted average corporate bond yields pre-ILNFS and current yield is same, remains constant despite fall in interest rates. Okay, so accordingly there is a zero impact. I like to differ here. What we see is the corporate bond yields in the primary markets were over 9% in the beginning of last year, that is around June, July 2018. And currently we see that the weighted average yield is around 7.9%. So there has been a significant decline in these yields, and one of the factors is the rate cuts by the RBI. There's a question, what part of the drop in CP yields is because the borrowers with a higher risk profile are just not getting funding anymore, leading to a 20% drop in CP issuances and therefore artificially propping up the average CP yield? While it is difficult to clearly say as to what would be the drop in yields on account of a higher risk entities not get able to tap this market, but we need to keep in mind here that CP issuances were always dominated by entities with higher credit rating. So to that extent, there wouldn't be much of a impact because of that. There's a question, can you please throw some light on the future long-term rates for NCD funding? Now, NCD funding would, for the coming future, would depend on a number of factors ranging from the RBI's interest rate actions, then the liquidity situation in the system, and also the demand for funds. Given that the RBI has indicated that it is going to be maintaining an accommodative monetary policy stance, we could see the interest rates in the system to moderate going forward. But at the same time, external factors could also come into play with regard to the interest rates of the central banks in advanced economies, which could lead to flow of capital from the country, so which could have a bearing on the rates and cost of funding. We have a question. There have been multiple rate cuts from the RBI side in the last 1 year. When would banks actually start passing the benefits to the end users? While there has been frequent demands for the better transmission of interest rate cuts by the banks to the end consumers, the underlying liquidity constraints in the system was one factor which was preventing this. Now, hopefully, given that the banking system liquidity situation is in surplus, it has improved, and the RBI has been making attempts to maintain liquidity in surplus. We can expect, or rather hope for the transmission to be more in the coming months.
We are running short of time, so probably that was the last query taken up for the day. All the unanswered query will be trying to reply by email. Thank you again for being a part of this Care Ratings webinar. We hope it was insightful. For any feedback, suggestions, you are please welcome to write to in our comment box, which will be coming no sooner the webinar ends in your mailboxes. Thank you and goodbye for now.